Hello there, my friend on the internet. This is Marie, and this is Sleepy Time for the Lost, Episode 3, covering the drowned lands of the Low Countries. But this version of it is designed to help you relax, and I hope wherever you are and whenever it is that you feel safe and happy and you're able to get some rest. I hope you love the story, and thank you so much for being here with me for it. And I'll check in with you again at the end. Enjoy. It's sometime in the early Middle Ages, in Europe, and more specifically in the Low Countries. What you're about to hear is something of a wandering legend. There's stories of it coming from the town of Safdinghy, as well as from the town of Westenshawen and several other places. However, every version of the story is quite similar, and every version goes something like this. There was once a town in the Low Countries that was very blessed. They were extremely wealthy, so wealthy in fact their horses' harnesses were of gold and the farmers wore gold. But the people of this town would soon become famous for another reason, not for their wealth, but for their greed. Anytime newcomers would come to the gates of the town, even if they were refugees and starving and struggling, the people of this town, despite having so much to give, would give nothing and would chase away the stragglers. And soon the people of our little legendary town were as hated as they were rich. One day, a group of extremely wealthy fishermen found themselves out on the North Sea. And as the fishermen from our wealthy little town pulled up their nets this day, they found themselves pulling up a mermaid. This mermaid, terrified and struggling, immediately began to beg them, "Please let me go. Please, please let me go. This was an accident. Please let me go." But the fishermen, oh no, they weren't going to let go of something like this. And she's begging them, and "Please, you have to let me go. I can't live on dry land. I'm going to die." But they don't care. This is the greatest catch they've ever made. No, no, no. They're bringing this back to land. And as she's crying and begging them to show her pity, her husband, a merman, comes out of the water and sees what's going on, and he starts begging the fisherman too, "Please, please, don't do this. You're going to kill my wife. You're going to kill the woman I love." And in some versions of the story, the merman is holding their child. The fishermen say no, and they laugh it off, and in their cruelty even throw rocks at the merman for his trouble. And the merman is not giving up. He follows the ship all the way back to the shore, and the whole time he's asking them, "Please let her go, please let her go," and they won't. And when they get to the shore, the fishermen drag their beautiful catch onto the land, and they throw her down on the ground, and everyone comes and gathers around to look at the mermaid. Oh, look at the beautiful mermaid, as the merman sits in the water and watches his wife die. And as he watches this and all these greedy, selfish people, the merman spits and he curses and he makes a proclamation warning everyone that now you've brought wrath down upon you. Now it's time to pay for your cruelty. Now it's time to pay for your greed. Now it's time for the end. And not long after, the sea, seeming to hear the merman's pain and the mermaid's cries of distress, responded. The waves would rise up over the night and completely engulf the town, killing everyone that was inside, though some legends insist that the bell tower could still be seen alone among the waves. And as alluded to, this is a legend. I have no real proof of a mermaid or merman or any type of mer creature in any way. And I think sometimes we come up with stories like this when terrible things happened to try to explain natural disasters to make them less scary. As I said, this is a story from the early Middle Ages. It's much less scary if the people that get wiped out in a disaster deserved it after all. And the Low Countries, in particular the Netherlands, is full of stories like this. Because the Netherlands, just by virtue of its geography, is obviously prone to a great deal of flooding. So the story we'll hear tonight will trump any story of flooding that you've ever heard. The story that you'll hear tonight is the story of one of the worst natural disasters to ever occur in human history. It would claim the lives of thousands and thousands of people and completely reshape the geography of the Netherlands basically into what we know it today. And while the people of the Netherlands, even by the Middle Ages, were no stranger to issues with water management, the storm surge and disaster that will be the basis of our story tonight was so huge and so life-changing that it forever altered the history and the culture, not just of the Netherlands, but of all Europe. Because tonight we're looking at the lost, drowned lands of the Low Countries.
and tonight we're learning the story of St. Lucia's flood. Hello, my name is Marie, and welcome to Lost Realms. Each episode, we look at a different city, place, or people who have been lost to us. Whether through the destruction of a disaster, the ravages of climatic changes, the failure of governments, or the cruelty of neighbors, each one of these places and people were taken from us forever. Some of these places were wonderful. Some of them were awful. Some of them held what we would consider the very best and brightest of humanity, and some could be considered part of the origin story of monsters. But all of them remain part of our collective human history, regardless of their moral alignment, and all of them we attempt, with love and understanding, to get to know here. We live in a world full of natural disasters, and frankly, in many ways, in a world that's struggling. But we also live in a world of survivors, a world full of people that have proven time and time again they can rise to the challenges in front of them and adapt. And this is not just true in the modern world. Sometimes when we talk about the importance of history, we tend to focus on not repeating our mistakes and learning from it in a sort of practical school book sense. But one of the greatest things about our collective human history is that we can look at it and see not just some sort of practical or moral lessons, but instead we can find inspiration. We can find stories of where other people have met the challenges that we now face and have faced those difficulties and managed to come out on top, or at least to survive. St. Lucia's flood, which originated in the North Sea in 1287, has gone on to be remembered as one of the worst floods in recorded human history, believed to have claimed between 50 to 80,000 lives, so honestly, it could have been even higher. It was a disaster that would cause untold suffering and change and difficulty to the people of the Netherlands and throughout the Low Countries. However, it is a disaster that not only did they rise above, but today, almost everything we know about the Netherlands is kind of affected by how they rose above the challenges of this flood. And as we'll see, the ingeniousness and resilience of the survivors of this flood continues to motivate and guide people even today. But if we want to get to know the story of St. Lucia's flood and the Low Countries and the Netherlands in particular, then as always, we can't just start with the Netherlands or even the North Sea. We need to start with the story of the land as a whole. The very name of the country we'll be discussing, the Netherlands, gives away something of its geography. The word Netherlands means literally Low Countries, and it's a very apt name for our region. The Netherlands, if you look at this image that I'm showing you here now, you can see is very, very flat, and over a quarter of the country lies below sea level, and a lot of it just at. The climate is temperate, with little snow and some rain in all seasons. And if you were to look around the Netherlands, much of the landscape you see today is quite new, even just compared to medieval times. And in fact, the first Homo sapiens to show up in our region some 40,000 years ago would have seen a completely different landscape. Though I should say I'm using our scientific name of Homo sapiens here for a reason. Neanderthals were also present here too at a much earlier date. We're talking plus 200,000 years ago, so there's always been resources here for human beings to find and use. It was just a way of learning how to work with the terrain and the sea. So much of living in the Netherlands, both in ancient times or today, revolves around working with the water. The first Homo sapiens arriving here were mostly hunter-gatherers, and we don't see more permanent settlements until around 4,800 BC. Although the people here were always ingenious in finding new ways to work with this terrain, by 500 BC, we know they were building terps, the distinctive earthen mounds that are still used today in the Low Countries. These giant human-made hills could function as a relief from storm surges and other flooding, keeping whatever was on top of them safe. We see these terps being used at an early date, at first just for houses and then later for whole villages. They are beautiful to look at even today and very functional. And the building of terps to provide livable land for people in this region worked well for well over 1,500 years. And while these early human inhabitants would face challenges like flooding and winds and everything else, once they managed this technology, the building of these terps, The path to success was ahead of them. And our area of the Netherlands is a rich one to want to inhabit. With the coastal flooding, the soils that exist here are rich and nutrient filled. Meanwhile, especially in ancient days, the ground itself held lots of iron ore, which made this a really valuable region for basically everyone that came across it. A famous superstar of the ancient world, the Romans, would prove this point readily when they took over the southern part of the country in 57 BC, and they would hold on to it for over 450 years. And while it's not often discussed today, the Roman history in the Netherlands is a fascinating period of time and had a huge impact on the development of the country. And after the Romans fell, going into the ADs now, different Germanic tribes would take over the area, perhaps most notably the Frisians. And throughout the early Middle Ages, we see the people of the Netherlands grow in amazing ways, and also in some turbulent ones. The Vikings would raid this region periodically, and the Christians would also be coming in and making a strong settlement and foothold. The Dutch language was beginning to arise around this time, and we see many different cultural developments as all of these different peoples start living in the same area. And the early medieval period saw many dikes built and different embankments funded by monasteries and other authorities. However, many of these dikes and embankments were built with clay and were very poorly constructed. They were also not very well maintained. And over time, many of these early dikes and embankments would become famous for collapsing often. There were many floods through the early medieval period and a great deal of loss of life. However, the people of this land were not giving up, and they continued to try to find new ways to build embankments and dikes, although government infighting and tensions between these different political groups were starting to come to a head. And as we near the year 1000 AD, things had started to take a very drastic turn. By 1000 AD, the territory that we would know today as the Netherlands was broken up into various different duchies and kingdoms. Following the chaos of the earlier collapse of the Romans, things had been rough there for a period, but now things politically were changing for different reasons. But we'll come back to that. For now, the people here had more pressing problems. Many of the dikes and dams of the earlier centuries had been, as I mentioned, poorly built and definitely not well planned. Over time, much of the land that they had tried to use for agriculture had started to sink into peat bogs. This left the whole region much more susceptible to flooding in general. Now water was beginning to pool up in places it wouldn't normally be. People that had managed to make farming work in certain regions for ages were now finding themselves struggling. Many people were able to switch to animal husbandry instead, but many were not. And as we reached the year 1200 AD, by that point, there had already been several major flood disasters. Meanwhile, any stability that had since emerged was now starting to evaporate. After the fall of the Romans, as I said, many different cultures had come through here. And though the area was now sort of a group of different duchies and kingdoms, all these different lords were constantly fighting amongst themselves for power and influence. All this means that while the local everyday people in the Netherlands had already proved for centuries that they were wonderful at working together, at organizing themselves to a level almost unseen anywhere else in the world at this early date, the governments involved could be less cooperative. And that could mean maintaining these dams and dikes and this valuable, necessary infrastructure kind of a challenge. And when there were natural disasters like floods, well, who do you turn to? Who is providing aid to the people? And while the people of the Netherlands were already quite good at taking care of themselves, no matter how tough or resilient or ingenious you are, you deserve a fair and respectful government that has your back. If things are chaotic in that regard and you have a natural disaster on top of it, things can get very, very dangerous very, very quickly. As at this point, I think it's necessary to stop and talk to you for a moment about the North Sea. The North Sea, as you'll notice from this image here, is a shallow northeastern arm of the Atlantic Ocean, right between the British Isles and mainland Europe. It's about 220,000 square miles, and our region of the Netherlands lies to the southeast. Though sitting as it does between a lot of different parts of Europe, a big storm or event in the North Sea can affect a very large amount of countries and people. Although the North Sea has also been a tremendous gift to every person to live around it as well in many ways. It's a valuable source of food, a waterway for travel, and therefore has affected every culture around it very positively too, for as long as people have been there. In prehistoric times, too, people would have been able to live in the North Sea quite differently than they do today. An area known as Dogger Bank used to be part of the mainland of Europe, but sank under the waters of the North Sea as it rose, following the glacial retreat at the end of the Ice Age. In fact, the coastline of the North Sea as we know it today probably only came into existence around 3,000 years ago. However, even saying that, it's changed a lot even during that time. As I said, the geography of the Netherlands has changed a lot during that time, as we're about to see now. And I dwell on this all for a second, not just because the North Sea is actually famous for its storms, not just because it can be a wild and turbulent place, but because we are now on the threshold of looking at one of the scariest storms to ever emerge from the sea. Because we now come at last to December 14th, 1287, meaning we have unfortunately reached the disaster that I promised you at the start of this episode, one that goes by many names, but the one that we're using, of course, is St. Lucia's flood. It would begin as a massive storm in the North Sea, building to cyclone force winds before eventually coming inward, creating a massive storm surge as it did. This, combined with unusually high tides, made massive waves that came immediately inwards, flooding huge parts of the coast. The poorly managed dikes and dams all failed, and not only that, but now water that had been held back was bursting through. And all of these factors combined led to this flood, St. Lucia's flood, being one of the deadliest in human history, claiming anywhere from 50 to 80,000 lives. Though honestly, it could have been way more, and the deaths were anywhere from the Netherlands to Germany to even England. Basically, anywhere the North Sea touched was touched by the storm and its surge. Homes, farms, monasteries, whole villages were completely wiped away. Whole cities were submerged under the power of this water, and much of this land could never be reclaimed, at least not until modern times. Again, the Netherlands is very low, and due to the poor management we've discussed at this time, much of the land was already boggy, so there was just nowhere for this water to go. Meanwhile, in the northwestern part of what would be the modern-day Netherlands, there was a medium-sized lake, an inland lake, known as the Aalmeer or Eel Lake. It had been connected to the sea through only a small river, but now with the power of the storm surge, this massive intake of water had pushed away the clay barriers in the earth until now it flowed directly into this lake, forming a whole new body of water and completely changing the geography of the Netherlands, both with the creation of this now new little sea called the South Sea or Zuiderzee. And you can just see from these pictures the dramatic difference and the horrible wreckage that this flood wrought on these people. And even though we're unfortunately very used to flooding in our times now, it's almost impossible to imagine what it would have been like back then with such massive death and nothing really to do. There's nowhere to run or to go. There's no Red Cross coming. This would have been a terrifying time. Now the world even was a different one. Small communities rallied together as best they could in their literally changed landscape. One village that had been landlocked before all this, a place of little consequence known as Amsterdam, suddenly found itself right at the coast of a fine new sea. And the village, later city of Amsterdam, would only gain importance after this event, which totally changed its future. And while the people of the Netherlands would unfortunately face many more floods in the future, this one in particular, both due to its tragic loss of life and its more positive consequences, seemed to have deeply shaped the people here. The Dutch would very soon begin reclaiming some of this land as polders, sections of arable land that had been taken from the sea through careful draining and water management, like canals and dikes and dams, use of which had long begun before this, but the Dutch would now perfect with the formation of this new sea. We can tell looking from the history too, rather than be traumatized or alarmed by their new landscape, the Dutch people would take to these challenges in places like Amsterdam by embracing it. There are many other settlements and towns that would flourish from this new change in geography, and it's clear that the people here learned many lessons from the St. Lucia flood, lessons that can still be used today. The earthen mounds, the terps, that the initial settlers of the Netherlands had begun to use and continue to use in places even today, are an inspiration in modern times to many people in dealing with the flooding associated with climate change. And it's clear today that All of us have a wonderful opportunity to learn from the Dutch people and their heritage of water management, both the wonderful progress that they made and their challenges and sorrows. And well, today, unfortunately, like many places, the Netherlands do face dangers from rising sea levels. If there's one thing that the stories from our past here in the Netherlands can teach us, it's how resilient we as a species can be, and how good we are at literally sometimes rising above the challenges that nature can throw at us. And so today, the drowned land of the Low Countries, well, kind of a sad place, is also kind of an inspirational one. And also, may I say, a very beautiful one. Large chunks of it now are nature reserve. In particular, I'm looking at the drowned land of Safdingy. It's just gorgeous. Look at this here. And so this people and their land both still have so much to show us today.
Hello again, my friend. Thank you so much for listening to Sleepy Time for the Lost, and I hope that wherever you are, that you're relaxed and you're able to get some rest. I hope too that you like the story. And if you have any suggestions for an upcoming episode idea that you would like to see made, please let me know in the comments below, or you can find my contact info in the description. But either way, thank you again for being here. Get some sleep, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.